Well, look, my team told me they were going to have some fun with the walk-up song. I didn't think Dolly Parton was the direction they were going to go in. Look, je vous remercie beaucoup de m'avoir invité à me joindre à vous aujourd'hui pour discuter l'importance de l'immigration en ce qui concerne les métiers de la construction et de la façon dont nous pouvons travailler ensemble pour relever certains des défis auxquels nous sommes confrontés. Avant d'aller plus loin, j'aimerais souligner que nous nous réunissons aujourd'hui sur le territoire ancestral, traditionnel et non cédé de la nation Anishinaabe-Algonquin. Look, before I get into my remarks, it's May 9th today, and this date has a lot of importance for me and in terms of why I support organized labor in this country. During the introduction, you heard I grew up in Pictou County, Nova Scotia. I live 10 minutes from the site of the West Ray Mine. It's been 31 years since today that my community lost 26 men. These were neighbors of mine, fathers, brothers, uncles, sons. And over the course of my life, I've had to deal with running into the family members who live without their loved ones every day. I can tell you I remember in elementary school sitting in our class hearing about the West Ray Mine disaster. I can remember the teachers telling us that the men were underground, but the rescue workers, the dragermen as they were called at the time, were working hard to bring the men above the surface. I remember every day sitting down in assembly as a kid, second grade, praying with my colleagues that they would one day resurface. And I remember a few days later, the teacher greeting us and telling us that the rescue effort had been called off. My thoughts are with the families today, and having grown up in a community that's been affected by the very worst of workplace disasters, I can tell you right now I'm committed as I ever have been to making sure every worker in this country has a right to go home at the end of the day. I came to share some thoughts on the role that immigration might play to help grow our economy in collaboration with organized labor in particular, and our cooperation with the building trades across this country. You know, before I get into the details of how our immigration strategy is going to help grow the economy, let me just start by saying that Canada is a nation of newcomers. Immigration it's not something that we do in Canada, it's who we are, it's who we've always been. With the exception of Indigenous communities, the opening chapter of every family's history in this country was written by a migrant. My family happened to wash up on the shores of Nova Scotia about 250 years ago, and that's why we still have a Scottish diaspora in northern Nova Scotia today. I've been playing the bagpipes for 30 years, and credit to the piper, he sounded great on the way out of the room here. But the reality is Canada is a patchwork of diaspora communities that have come from all over the world. That's the way it has been over the course of our history. That's the way it's going to be in the future. And we need to continue to embrace immigration as a growth strategy. We need to do it for economic reasons. We need to do it for demographic reasons. To understand the economic imperative of immigration, both in the short and long term, I think it's important that we understand the economic context that we're living through. As many folks in this room are going to know, it's been a heck of a couple of years. The last number of years through the COVID-19 pandemic has really demonstrated to us the importance of supporting workers and supporting the businesses that employ them to make sure that they're here to give back to our communities. After the world opened up on the heels of the COVID-19 pandemic, what we saw was Canada's resiliency outpaced every advanced economy in the world. We're dealing with a situation where we've got just about the lowest rate of unemployment in this country's history. Our GDP is well in excess of pre-pandemic levels. And there are more people working in this country than ever before. In fact, about 900,000 more people are working now than during the pandemic. This is extraordinary, but despite these successes, we still have an extraordinary labor shortage. Malgré ces succès, juste dans l'été passé, il y a proche de 1 million de vacances de notre économie. C'est incroyable. C'est essentiel pour continuer d'accueillir des personnes avec les compétences essentielles pour notre économie. Alors, si vous voulez maximiser le potentiel de notre économie, if we're going to make the most of the opportunity that is staring us right in the face, we need to continue to embrace immigration as a growth strategy. The reality is Canada's population growth is more or less exclusively due to immigration these days. The same thing is true about the future projections for our labor force growth. If we want to maximize the economic potential of this country, we have an advantage that most countries don't. Immigration is not the same political controversy in Canada that it might be in some of our competitor economies. And as the entire world opens up at approximately the same time, we've come to understand that we're competing for the same pool of talent globally. And if we use the competitive advantage of having a welcoming country, we can hang our shingle out to a much wider market audience that's going to attract the skills we need that are going to build the future economy for Canada. But it's not just about addressing labor shortages in the short term. It's about identifying the skills that we're going to need for the long term and combating an extremely worrying demographic trend. If we rewind the clock about 50 years, there was about 7 workers for every retiree in this country. Today, that number's closer to 3. By the time I'm retired, and in fact in Atlantic Canada today, that number's closer to 2. 2 workers for every retired person. Now, the challenges with a demographic curve like that might not be apparent to everyone, but I can tell you, coming from rural Atlantic Canada, I've seen this movie before, and thankfully we've been able to correct some of the challenges that we've been facing as a result of this demographic trend. But when I was first to Canada back in 2015, some of the most controversial issues that we wrestled with in our community was the closure of a local elementary school and the shutdown of the mental health unit at the largest regional hospital in northern Nova Scotia. Now, these things weren't a coincidence. They were the byproduct of an out-migration of our population, particularly of our young working-age population. What we saw with the elementary school in River John was families had been moving out of our communities to seek economic opportunity elsewhere for many, many years. And it didn't make sense from an economic point of view for the provincial government at the time to continue operating the school. We lost a psychiatrist at the mental health unit to pursue opportunity elsewhere and couldn't safely operate the unit without their presence. We weren't attracting the skills we needed to continue to provide public services that we too often take for granted. And we were eroding the revenue base that we also took for granted that paid for these services. The reality is it's not just an issue of counting on public services being available when you have an aging population without a pipeline of young and talented people filling it in. It also creates new economic needs. As a population ages, the needs of your society change. Of course, with an older population, you need more workers in healthcare. You need to build out different kind of homes that seniors can retire in safely, with down to the details about having a level entrance to the floors for mobility purposes. But you also have a mass retirement. As the baby boomers edge into their senior years, we're going to need to backfill the gaps that that's going to leave in the economy, not just over the next 6 months, but over the next few generations. This is where immigration has a unique opportunity to play a role in Canada to fill in those skills shortages, not just the labor shortages, to set us up for success in the long term. You know, I was speaking at an event in Toronto that Aliuna was kind to co-host just a month or 2 ago. And Joe Mancinelli, who will be a familiar name. Is Joe in the room here today? I don't see him. Well, I see some nod. Oh, there he is at the back. So I'm going to quote you here, and hopefully you weren't blowing smoke at us at the time. Sitting in Ontario alone, they could easily find spots for 25,000 people right now. Think about that. 25,000 people for jobs that exist today, before you even factor in the new jobs that will be required to serve 25,000 additional people living in the community. The reality is that you don't need to speak to organized labor or pore over the labor force statistics data like I do every month to understand that there is a labor shortage in this country. Go down Main Street of any community in this country. You're still going to see help wanted signs in the window. Despite the fact that there might have been an extraordinary economic recovery compared to other advanced economies in the world, we might be winning the race, but not by the margin that I think we could. And if we continue to embrace immigration, we're going to be able to grow that margin and grow Canada's economy, which is going to enhance the well-being of people who call this country home. Now, the good news is we have been working hard to advance solutions to the labor shortage, to advance solutions to the skills shortage through our immigration policies. Of course, we co-hosted the event where we released this year's annual immigration levels plan with the building trades. And we announced very proudly that we were moving towards welcoming 500,000 people annually as permanent residents over the next couple of years. To put this into perspective, in 2014, the total number of newcomers that we were welcoming to Canada was less than half that figure. Canada has quietly doubled its ambition when it comes to immigration, and it's been met with a collective sigh in Canada saying, oh, that seems about right. It's unique when I meet with my counterparts all over the world that Canada's #1 problem when it comes to immigration is that we can't move quickly enough to satisfy the demand of communities that want so many newcomers to come to our communities. When I speak internationally, my colleagues think it's a joke when I tell them that the biggest challenge I have is that we need to welcome more people more quickly to satisfy Canadians. Because, of course, the political dynamic in other parts of the world is whether they have the capacity to deal with people, whether it's going to erode their culture, whether we can bring people in that will match the values of the people who call their respective countries home today. Now, of course, we have some of the same concerns that we need to address in Canada, but it comes from a starting point of we need to welcome newcomers, let's do it the right way, rather than saying we need to shut the door on newcomers as a solution to some of these challenges. Now, in order to overcome the very real challenges in needing to bring people here more quickly, there's a number of things that we've worked to do. In addition to setting our ambition at its highest level, we've met that ambition with the resources that are necessary to process people more quickly. You will all recall the challenges around processing times that existed as we opened up from the COVID-19 pandemic, coincidentally just about the time that I slid into this position. Over that time, we've put resources into the system, hiring about 1,600 new staff, relaxing a lot of administrative policies, and adopting technology at a pace that we never have before as a department. The combined impact of these strategies has been to dramatically speed up the process, and we're now very near the processing times for work permits, for study permits, visitors' visas, and permanent residency that we enjoyed before COVID-19 was something that we ever knew about. But we've also tailored our approach to make sure that the people who we bring in will have a bigger economic impact that will also help us solve some of the social challenges that we're facing. In particular, we've worked with provincial governments to boost the number of spaces allocated to them through their various provincial nominee programs so they can tailor the economic strategy for the needs of their unique jurisdictions. We've embraced regional programs to ensure that the entire country, not just our biggest cities, have an opportunity to benefit from immigration through programs like the Atlantic Immigration Program or the Rural and Northern Immigration Program. We've moved forward with the Employment Mobility Pathways Pilot, which is a way to bring skilled refugees into the economy that recognizes that the people who come here in need of protection show up with an awful lot more than what they're carrying in their bags. This program, in fact, has led to a recruitment initiative in Jordan for skilled tradespeople who are at risk of displacement, who have the skills that are essential to contribute to our economy. There's people who are working in my community today, in communities across Canada today, in healthcare, in home building, in tech. This is the kind of innovative program that's going to provide protection to people in need, but also serve the interests of people who call Canada home. We're also moving forward with new funding opportunities that will speed up the process of credential recognition. We've worked very closely with the Canadian Labour Congress to design a program that's going to provide a pathway to permanent residency for undocumented workers in the construction sector in particular. And later this year, we're moving forward with a major change to the federal express entry system. For those of you who don't know the lingo, that's how we select newcomers under the federal stream, by assigning them a score based on things like their work experience, their education, their language abilities. And it's very good at attracting talented people, but it's essentially a sledgehammer when we need a scalpel, because it doesn't do a very good job of highlighting the people who are in the greatest need. We've developed a new tool that we expect to deploy in the second half of this year, which we discussed when we released the Immigration Levels Plan, that will allow us for the first time to do a targeted draw specific to the skilled trades to bring the people into this country that are going to help us build houses. This is going to be a major shift in the way that we select newcomers, and I'll be pleased to share details over the next number of weeks and months about the timing and expectations you should have as we seek to bring new skilled workers into the economy through this tool. The reality is, we're going to need you guys. Every building that I go to work in was put up by a worker and the company that employs them. Every room that we have a meeting in was put together by people who work in the skilled trades. The number one challenge that I hear in communities today, even like mine that previously saw people moving away, is whether we can build houses quickly enough to welcome the people who want to move to our community. We can't do that without making serious changes. And despite the fact there may be obstacles at the municipal level around zoning, despite the fact that increasing rates set by the Bank of Canada may have cooled the investment ambition for some builders, the number one challenge I still hear for people who have approvals waiting today is that they don't have the labor that they need to meet the projects that they already plan to build. We can help solve that problem if we work closely together by identifying the talent that exists in the world today that wants to come to Canada that we got jobs for. I want to take this opportunity to conclude to say thank you. Thank you for the embrace of newcomers. Thank you for the work that you do to build homes in my community, and thank you for your continued contribution to growing the Canadian economy. We're going to be able to partner in the years ahead to make sure that we're meeting the economic and social needs of our communities together. But I'll conclude the way I began, with a message of gratitude for your representation of those workers who came from my community and their families. This is an emotional day back home. But to know that those men did not die in vain at the West Ray Mine 31 years ago is something that I need to tell myself every night before I go to bed. We need to continue to advocate for the workers who put their lives on the line, who perished that day, and make sure that we continue to advance reforms that hold responsible the people who are willing to put profit above the well-being of their workers. It is not okay that we accept, 31 years later, virtually no prosecutions under the criminal liability that was established during the West Ray Law. The debate was so encouraging in my community that we were finally going to see some reforms. And on paper, it sounds wonderful. But through your advocacy and in partnership with our government, we can continue to work to hold responsible actors liable for their shortcomings. But more importantly, we can create workplace environments where we don't have to have discussions about liability because the people who go to work come home safely at the end of the day. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. C'est un plaisir d'être ici avec vous. À la prochaine.